Welcome, excuse me, welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. Cedar Lane is a liberal religious community where love works. We gather to explore the eternal, to nurture community, and to build a more just world, and dare to build the beloved community of all souls. Whether this is your first time at Cedar Lane, or you are an occasional guest, or a new or longtime member, your presence here this morning enriches our community. Our faith calls us to offer an open and radical welcome to all who gather here. If you are new to Cedar Lane and feel comfortable doing so, would you raise your hand? Welcome. Please keep your hand raised so we can offer you a small gift in appreciation of your choosing to worship with us today. Our welcome does not end with worship. All are invited to enjoy coffee, tea, and conversation after the service in the lounge. If you are new to Cedar Lane, we invite you to use a yellow mug as a reminder to our members to greet and welcome you. I encourage you to look at the insert in your order of celebration about what's happening here this week, including many opportunities to meet with architects about renovations to our building. Please also see the display in the lounge about our sanctuary and solidarity trip to the Mexican border in October. We will explore both the deep injustices and the inspiring community responses to the ongoing immigration crisis, and we'll have a good time together. This would be a good time to put your cell phone on worship mode. Our senior minister, Reverend Abi Janamanchi, is on study leave and vacation. We are delighted to have with us today the Reverend Kenneth Torquil MacLean. Ken is Minister Emeritus at Cedar Lane. He was our minister here from 1972 to 1992. He has served on the board of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and was a member of the board of the Unitarian Universalist Association from 1981 to 1989. Between 1992 and 2012, he served 3 times for a total of almost 12 years as minister at the UU Church of the Desert in Palm Springs, California. It is not an overstatement to say that in Palm Springs, Ken built a UU church. In 2014, Ken received the UUA Distinguished Service Award, one of the most prestigious awards given by the UUA. Last year, he moved from California to Asbury Village in Gaithersburg, and we are therefore blessed to have him among us again, often on Sunday mornings. Ken MacLean. Let us center ourselves, inviting our mind, body, and spirit into this space made sacred by our presence and the presence of the holy. Let this be a time of reflection. Let this be a time of celebration. Let this be a time of worship. Come, let us worship together. If there are bells, let them be rung. If there are words of joy, let them be shouted. Rejoice, rejoice, give thanks. Give thanks for that first cell that chose to join with cell, bold for human venture. The jetting sperm, the microscopic egg, the fetal fish, swimming within the hospitable womb. Give thanks for these and for the skeleton that hides the heart behind its latticed ribs and shelters in its hollow skull the brain, plump on its armored stem. Give thanks for the body's form, for the gift of breath. Above all, Praise the cell's arithmetic that adds the body's parts to make a self that's greater than the sum, that hears and sees and knows it hears and sees, and knows itself, aware of joy. Death after such awareness is no pain, and to have lived is blessing. Sing, give thanks. Please rise in body and/or in spirit to sing our opening hymn, number 1002 in the Teal hymnal.
Sing with me, 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 oh my soul. Speak for me, speak. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Comfort me.
As Carolyn Brown and Tim Eastman come forward to kindle the chalice, please rise to speak in unison the chalice lighting words printed in your order of celebration. At this hour, all over the world, in small towns and big cities, in simple rooms and ornate sanctuaries, many of our sister Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting a flaming chalice. As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are part of a great community of faith. May this dancing flame inspire us to fill our lives with the Unitarian Universalist ideals of love, justice, and truth.
Thank you. nothing whatsoever in any way, shape, or form like any other. There is nothing like a day, nothing in the world. There is nothing you can name that is anything like a day. The world looks like a day, and nothing looks like a day. There are no drinks like a day, and nothing drinks like a day. Nothing acts like a day, or attracts like a day. There ain't a thing that's wrong with any man here that can't be cured by putting him near a girly, womanly, female, feminine
Let us enter into a time of remembrance and reflection. We gather each week not for our needs alone, but to bear witness to the joys, sorrows, and milestones that unfold in all our lives, and to serve as companions to one another throughout these profound journeys of faith. We gather to build a place of solace and healing, a place of welcome and hope, a place of belonging and joy. We gather to build the beloved community where all souls are welcome and lives are rendered whole and reconciled. Within the embrace of this community, our thoughts continue to be with Ezra Klein, who remains in the hospital. We are reassured that some 50 members of the Ku Klux Klan who sought to hold a rally in Charlottesville yesterday were met with about 1,000 counter-protesters. May these friends of ours and all that lives unspoken in our hearts be held in the embrace of prayer, the solace of shared silence, and then in song.
Will you join me in a spirit of prayer? Eternal God, there are moments in our lives in which we are together in religious community and yet alone within ourselves. We say words and sing hymns together. We respond and connect the words to our lives by ourselves. Each of us has come to this place from a different week of experience and feelings, and the self we bring to this gathering may be open and receptive to what happens here, or it may be closed, too busy pondering all that has happened to us to hear, really hear, anything outside of ourselves. The constant challenge of our meeting together is to connect what takes place to the rest of our lives and the rest of our week. Some of us have had busy, ordinary days this week, full of responsibilities for the complicated lives we have chosen. Some of us have known special celebrations, times with people we do not often see. Some of us have dealt this week with grievous news of friends or loved ones who are lost to us. Some of us have been preoccupied with small things which leave us feeling distracted from what really matters to us. May we find sustenance for our spirits in the very fact of our being together, and the knowledge that with all our differences, those of us in this room share some elements of our lives in common. And those elements are important in defining who we are. Amen.
The first reading is called Old Woman's Song. It's written by Violet Turner, who was a longtime member of Cedar Lane. I may be old, unlovely to the eye of one who looks for pointed breast, smooth cheek, inviting thigh, but what of that? My mouth was honey and my taste was sweet to more than one when I was young, and love my heart's own beat. And what of that? I've lived my life and loved it. What I had was worth each bit of what I paid. And should I now be sad because of that? I'll not cry because no bright tomorrows repeat my yesterdays. I've found old joys appease new sorrows, and that is that.
I remember Violet well. She started writing poems early in life and published her first book when she was 85. The second part of the reading is from a New York Times op-ed piece by Renee Bracy Sherman. She said, "When I had an abortion, I was 19 and alone. Though I was pretty sure my parents would have supported my decision, I didn't want to take the risk, so I kept it a secret. My boyfriend at the time dropped me off at the clinic, unwilling to go inside. I walked through the bomb-proof door, and a kind Orthodox Jewish nurse took care of me. She held my hand as the sedation filled my veins and offered me saltine crackers and Coca-Cola when I woke up in the recovery room. These are the realities of abortion. The need to terminate a pregnancy knows no political affiliation or religious faith. I've hugged, cried with, and held the hands of hundreds of people who've had abortions, many of whom never thought they would. All were thankful that someone was there to provide care, to sit with them when they were alone, and to hold their hands as the nausea took over. All felt the stigma and shame society thrusts on them. The abortion debate rages on, but the voices of those who've actually had abortions are ignored. Few people try to understand our lives, and we are never asked the most simple but important question: why did you do it? That's intentional. It's easier to strip us of our rights when we're treated not as humans, when political candidates say we deserve some form of punishment, when elected officials vote to define abortion as murder, when people call us killers. Language matters, and it leads to violence. Abortion providers and people who share their stories, including me, have received thousands of threats. But nearly 1/3 of American women are estimated to have an abortion by the age of 45, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a research group that supports abortion rights. 62% of us are people of color. A majority are religious. We're trying to make ends meet and can't afford to expand our family at that particular time. The crux of the issue is not whether you would have an abortion yourself. It's whether you would stand in the way of someone else's decision. Everyone loves someone who has had an abortion, though we may not know it. That's Renee Bracy Sherman.
Dream that I would discover the perfect
My gratitude to all our musicians. It's wonderful to work with you, and it's wonderful to be in this familiar pulpit. I heard recently of a young man who had decided to come out, that is, to let his family know that he is gay at Thanksgiving dinner when all the family would be present. In the middle of dinner, he said to his mother, "Mom, would you pass the gravy to a homosexual?" His mother passed the gravy to his father, resulting in not the scene that he had expected. My fascination this morning is with a lot of ways in which our whole experience of sexuality and gender have changed, and how we have taken in those changes. I would share a few more stories of people and issues that have changed. I think of my father's family living on a farm near a waterway in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. My grandfather operated a ferry boat for about 50 years, rowing a flat-bottomed boat across a bay, carrying a horse and buggy. They raised 11 children there in a house with no indoor plumbing or electricity. They had 5 girls in a row and then 6 boys in a row. I only recently wondered about how it worked out for the 6 boys to grow up with 5 big sisters. Fascinating. Since they all survived by farming and fishing, it must have been a busy life. There are a great many ways for people to relate to each other. I think of a strong, articulate woman who told me that she had been divorced for a number of years. But she said, "I always thought we would end up together, and then he went out and died on me." Many ways of relating. We were all pretty clear about what was expected of men and what women would do until the Second World War came along. And great numbers of men went into military service, and women were stepping into jobs they had not done before. We saw lots of posters of Rosie the Riveter. And a few years later, Betty Friedan wrote a best-selling book, The Feminine Mystique, which expressed the frustration of many women who felt limited by the expectation that, of course, they must stay at home and care for the children and feed the family. Betty Friedan's protest was added to by such leaders as Gloria Steinem and Bella Abzug. Soon a national organization of women was formed called NOW. This was the beginning of a great conversation among women all over the continent about what it meant to be a woman in this society. And it was also the beginning of the feminist revolution strong moves for greater equality among men and women. It seems to me appropriate to point out that men have not really had a similar conversation. Men aren't used to talking in terms of what their lives are really about. I remember a man who sat in my office because of a minor crisis, and who ended up telling me about his youth, his work, his marriage. And then he said, "I never talked like this with anyone before." There have been sporadic breakthroughs here and there, but no widespread conversation about the impact that the women's movement has had on men's lives. It seems to me that the discussion might start with my perception that in this society, men have more power, but women have more freedom. Think about it. Isn't the role, definition of what it takes to be accepted and respected as a man much narrower than for a woman? Think of how we dress, how we speak, how we are expected to compete. The father of a girl who climbs trees and plays basketball and goes fishing may be heard to brag that she's a real tomboy, but you won't hear him describe his son as a real sissy. I think that the two questions for both men and women to ask are, how much power do I really have, and how much freedom? We know that the answers are changing. Sometimes the freedom must be seized. I think of Melinda Gates, married to the man who's been called the richest man in the world, Bill Gates. Melinda Gates is a Roman Catholic in faith and education. She and her husband have traveled widely around the world, seeking out the problems where their leadership and money could make a difference. And Melinda has decided that the need expressed most often by women everywhere is for control over their reproduction. And she's made the major focus of her life, her work, to spread the means of birth control. And this puts her in direct conflict with the teachings of her church. But she finds the testimony of a great many women more persuasive than the abstract teaching of a church led by men. A more difficult issue, which divides the religious world, is the availability of abortion. The account I read by a woman who had had an abortion when she was 19, and 10 years later was part of a group which offered support to women who sought an abortion. And she made the issue quite clear. She fights for the right of the woman and her doctor to be the ones to make the decision. This right has been the law of the land since the Supreme Court decision of 1973. but there are constant attempts to change it. It is fair, I think, to say that this is the bedrock issue of the feminist movement. Who makes the decision? I know of a teenage boy who was gradually realizing that he was sexually attracted to boys and men rather than girls and women. It felt as though he was the only one in the world. He had no models, no person he could talk it over with. In fact, he was convinced for several years that if anyone found out what he was experiencing, he would have to commit suicide. Although we have all experienced a revolution in recent years in our awareness of homosexuality, with the controversy over don't ask, don't tell policy in the armed forces, the final acceptance of gay marriage, the AIDS epidemic, which hit the gay community very hard, there is still widespread rejection of the gay reality. I know of a son who came home from New York to tell his parents that he was gay and that he was HIV positive. That father went out into the garden and he just sobbed. But he and his wife gave their son every bit of love and support they could to the end of his life. But we hear all the time of homeless young people who have been rejected and tossed out on the street by families who cannot accept this reality, either through ignorance or hostile religious teaching. There are lesbian and gay centers in most major cities in the United States who are doing excellent work in support of youth and adults who are so isolated. In 1971, the Unitarian Universalist Association established the Office of Lesbian and Gay Concerns. They were going to call it the Office of Gay Affairs, but they thought better of it. In 1980, the first two openly gay ministers were settled in Unitarian Universalist churches. And since then, our denomination has been quite united in support of men and women who identified as gay or lesbian. And since the 1960s, the denomination has offered some of the best education in human sexuality that has been developed. In recent years, we've encountered another aspect of the reality of gender of which most of us were not aware. People who affirmed that within themselves they knew that they were really of the opposite sex from how they had been named and dressed and treated all their lives. In some cases, these persons felt so strongly that they persisted in changing their identity. And so we learned what transgender meant. Bruce Jenner participated in the 1972 Olympics in the decathlon competition a series of events that have been called the toughest challenge in the Olympics. He decided in 1972 that more than anything else in his life, he wanted to win the decathlon in 1976. He came home and started training, a program of exercise for 6 or 8 hours a day, 365 days a year. 4 years later, he won the decathlon and said he would never compete again. He gave it up and left his javelin poles at the sports arena. Called by some the greatest athlete in the world, he built up a system of endorsements which brought him a tidy income. He developed a television career. He was married 3 times, fathered several children. In 2015, he announced that he was really a woman and set out through a highly publicized process to become a woman named Caitlyn Jenner. I bring this up in order to challenge you to imagine what it must have been like to go through this process. Not so long ago, most of us would not have been able to see the even possibility of anyone changing from a man to a woman. And now we are confronted with a whole new category, transgender. This is one more situation where our notion of male and female was too limited. Our understanding of ways to be human has been inadequate. I propose that this topic is religious for several reasons. First, because if religion is taking life and death seriously, maybe my favorite definition, then our concept of life should be broad enough to include all its possibilities. Second, because when we struggle to know who we are, probably we begin with a definition, an identification like man or woman. If either category changes, then the whole idea changes. And we need to do some work, some more work, to figure out who we are. Furthermore, as we discover new groups of vulnerable people, don't we have an obligation to take them seriously in our thinking? For example, if there's a whole new category of people who are struggling to be who they really are, and they are getting out there, is there anything more stupid than to demand that they go to the bathroom indicated on their birth certificate? If we come to the point of recognizing that there are different ways of being a man or being a woman, or being a boy or being a girl? Do we owe them the respect, the decency of giving them a spot in our world where they can be themselves? If there is nothing like a dame, starts out being a compliment, as it was this morning, how do we get to the place where we recognize that there are a lot of different dames out there, and we're not just lumping them all together?
The offering to sustain the mission and ministry of Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church will now be given and received. Through the work of our hearts and the work of our hands, our love is made real. May we be grateful for all that we bring and share to make this a beloved community. Please rise in body and/or in spirit to sing hymn number 1024 in the Teal hymnal.
Spirit
says do. Spirit says do. Spirit says do. Spirit says do. Put those books down. Sing. You got to sing when the Spirit says sing. You got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you got to sing. Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing. Come on, let's dance. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you got to dance, Lord. You got to dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 We're gonna laugh. Laugh when the Spirit says laugh. We're gonna laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, we got to laugh. Lord, we got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 Let's shout. We got to shout. Shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit says shout, we got to shout. Lord, we got to shout when the Spirit says shout. 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 Do. Spirit says do.
Remember who you are. Remember what you love. Remember what is sacred. Remember what is true. Remember that each of us will die, and that today is a gift. And that's why we call it the present. Will you sit for the postlude now?